Hmm. I mentioned earlier that I was very blessed, and for me, it really began in high school with a gentleman by the name of Doc Bernhard. We called him Doc Bernhard. And I mentioned that I went to a high school in New York City called DeWitt Clinton High School. There were 10,000 of us at DeWitt Clinton. There were 2,000 in my graduating class. We were all guys. And what I remember about that experience, particularly as we focus on the MCAS and other standardized tests, was that I scored 650 on the SATs, and they tell me that you got 200 points just for signing your name. But despite that, Doc Bernhard encouraged me. I don't know how, but he did. He identified this young man among the 10,000 others at DeWitt Clinton. He identified me and encouraged me to apply for a scholarship. And the scholarship was through a foundation called the Joseph L. Fisher Foundation in New York. They awarded two $10,000 scholarships to students of African descent. So I was one of the two recipients of the Fisher Foundation scholarship. So that when I finally went away to college, which was Springfield College, I didn't have to pay a dime. I never saw a bill for the 4 years that I was at Springfield College. Didn't see a bill. He also encouraged me to apply to two schools. One, obviously Springfield. The other was Howard University. I was accepted at both of those institutions. So he was in a real sense a bridge builder for me. He was able to aid me in making the transition from high school to college. There was another person, I didn't mention that early on, and that is a fellow by the name of Bill Medels. And I saw Bill about a week or so ago. And Bill was a director of a program called Upward Bound. Upward Bound at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And to make a long story short, Bill had me asked me if I wanted to work. A fellow by the name of James White gave me a job when I was a freshman at Springfield to work in this program called Upward Bound. So I worked that summer, but after that he was gone and Bill Medels had become director. Bill asked me if I wanted to work during the academic year as a tutor in the program. And then asked me if I wanted to work when the summer came around as a resident assistant in that program. Well, he encouraged me over the 4 years that I was at Springfield College. And on graduating from Springfield, he offered me the job as the assistant director of Upward Bound. He would leave to come to Boston to work for DYS. And DYS being the Department of Youth Services. And I became the director of that Upward Bound program. And there were 150 students in Upward Bound. At that time, I was 22 years old. So I was the youngest Upward Bound director in the country. Two white men, that were critically important in my journey. The fact that I'm at Boston College and doing the work that I'm doing now has a large part to do with the encouragement that I received from Doc Bernhard and from Bill Medels.
Say a little bit about, your career in terms of beyond that period where you had these very extraordinary men who were very helpful, as you described. What would you say about your career in that same regard?
What I'd say about, there have been some people, two that come immediately to my mind. And these were folk that I didn't interact with on a daily basis. I didn't see them with any regularity. I didn't work directly under their jurisdiction. But I knew that they were there, as supporters of the work that we did in the Office of AHANA student programs. One such person was Dr. Frank Campanella. the executive vice president at Boston College. The other was the Reverend J. Donald Monin, who for 24 years was the president of Boston College. I didn't work directly under them, but I always knew where they stood in terms of the support of my work here in the Office of AHANA Student Programs. As I mentioned, if I ever asked for something, if I had a reasonable proposal, all I had to do was go to either one of them. I could sit down and talk to them. If it was a reasonable request, it would be acted on. In terms of the budget for the office, the budget has grown over the years, and that is because when I've gone away to conferences, when I woke up with a dream of something that I want, I woke up and as a result of a dream, had an idea about something that I wanted to do. All I had to do was go to them and share the dream with them and put together a proposal. And more likely than not, it would be funded. Mm-hmm. You know? So I knew that the support was there.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the whole idea, we talked a little bit about it, but outline and comment on what you would consider, best practices in the sort of bridge leadership kind of arena that you've seen here, as well as any other place you've had experiences in higher education. Things that you have recognized by individuals or even as groups of just very good practices, the best practices you've seen associated with bridge leadership.
Well, I think the bridge leaders are always willing to make time. That if a call is made, that they will first of all get back in touch in short order. It really doesn't take them weeks and weeks to be back in touch. They'll try to be back in touch as soon as possible. That if you request a meeting to sit down to share an idea, a thought or feeling with them, that they make themselves accessible. That they have a commitment. They have a commitment to diversity. They recognize the importance of diversity. That they simply make the time, that diversity is high on their agenda. The other thing in terms of blind alleys, that they alert you to obstacles mm-hmm. that you might otherwise encounter. They tell you about people. They tell you about situations that you need to be aware of before becoming engaged mm-hmm. in those situations. So they pave the way mm-hmm. for you.
Mm-hmm. Now, Don, you mentioned, for example, there have been some programs and that have been established here that have been very instrumental in making the environment more positive for, minority students, for people, etc. When you look at over the years, some of those practices, I think, are worth mentioning, and also the creators or the people behind establishing those kinds of programs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you seen it? Those also are the kind of good practices that have an overall effect as opposed to an individual effect. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's been your experience in that arena?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think about the precursor to this program. This is the Office of AHANA Student Programs, and that name came into existence back in 1979. Mm-hmm. But before that, it was the Office of Minority Student Programs, and even before that, there was a program in 1968 called the Black Talent Program. Mm-hmm. And the Black Talent Program came into existence in large measure as a result of some faculty saying that Boston College needs to do more by way of increasing the presence of students of color at the university. These faculty, I guess during the time of Vatican II and the Catholic Church, when the Catholic Church was saying that colleges and universities, Catholic colleges and universities, should do more about reaching out to the community. Some of these faculty members were on the case and saying we need to do something in bringing students from Roxbury and Dorchester to Boston College. They were in sync with Mel King and Bryant Rollins, and black students on the campus, that the few black students that were here, who were saying, black and white students, who were saying that more needed to be done to bring an increasing number of students of color. So the result of that was the creation of the Black Talent Program. Okay. More recently, I think about the University Affiliates Program, and I talked to you about it. And essentially what that program does is affords an opportunity to mid-level managers of color to get the breadth and depth of experience that might lead to them advancing at Boston College and other institutions of higher ed. I invoke the name Campanella. Frank Campanella was directly in his role as executive vice president responsible for that. I mentioned the idea of the affiliates program at a meeting of the Association of Black Faculty, Staff, and Administrators. He thought that it made some sense. There wasn't a lot of fanfare. He didn't rush to the paper to talk about what it was he was going to do. There wasn't a press conference and the like. But he rallied around the idea. He said it made sense to him, and we're going to make this possible. Okay. And that's another point on the question that you raised earlier. Yeah. The bridge builders don't require a lot of patting on the back. Their names don't have to be all over the Boston Globe. They don't have to be on radio and television. They do it because they recognize the importance of advancing persons of color, of bringing others along. They see the value in doing this. And it's almost an instinctive kind of thing for them.
Interesting.
They see the importance of doing it. So when you see a Frank Campanella, when you see a J. Donald Monin, when you see a Bernie O'Brien, I think the term that folk use is self-effacing. These folk don't take themselves too seriously. They seem to be very humble, but they're very powerful because they're about doing rather than a lot of talking. And I guess maybe it comes along with growing older, because when we're younger we do a lot of talking, but when we grow a little bit older we become wiser, and we try to do more by way of listening, and I guess that's the blessing in growing older. Yeah. We pray when we're young for knowledge. When we grow older, Brother Steve, we pray for wisdom. Yeah. And it really requires listening a lot more than the talking. Yeah.
That's well said. Well, I have one other question, and that's kind of related to the whole issue of how you view your institution's efforts, to increase the minority presence on campus, to improve race relations and racial climate, and develop a community diverse in cultural, racial, and ethnic identity. You talked a little bit about that. Say a few words about that before we close.
I really see a commitment here in Boston College. And recently I was in a meeting, in fact about 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with the Director of Enrollment Management. and the director of enrollment management was talking about the applications. Applications for AHANA students is up from last year, and the numbers were unprecedented last year. And to be more specific, for black students last year and over the last several years, the numbers have been over 100. Last year, I think it was about 110 black students in the entering class. That was the largest in the history of Boston College. I think it's going to be even greater, and that's based on what the director of admissions said. It's going to be larger numbers this year. 24, I did mention earlier that 24% of the entering class, the class of 2006, were AHANA students. That's black, Latino, Asian, and Native American. 24% of the entering class. And I remember a time when it wasn't 10% AHANA students. So there is a commitment, with a specific, special commitment to increasing the numbers of black students. On the faculty, I was reading the Heights, the university newspaper, and there's an article in there and words from the associate vice president that there is a commitment, an ongoing commitment to increase the presence of persons of color on the faculty. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier, I was invited down to the School of Education for a meeting about a week or so ago. In fact, I gave your name, to a search firm because they're trying to fill a chair in the School of Education, and the chair is named in honor of the late David Nelson, Judge David Nelson. Mm-hmm. There'll be a permanent chair in the School of Education named in his honor. Mm-hmm. This year, she's a nun, Dr. Sean Copeland, came to visit, and she occupies an endowed chair in the theology department. And I spoke to her yesterday, and she'll be doing something for us probably in another month or so. Mm-hmm. So there are these efforts. Mm-hmm. There are these efforts to increase the presence of color at BC. The other thing is, and I didn't mention it earlier, I had a meeting with the executive vice president about 2 or 3 weeks, about a month ago. It was about a month ago, and his name is Patrick Keating. The Black Faculty Staff Administrators Association expressed concerns about the climate of life for black administrators, for students on campus, and we still have some issues that have to be addressed. And we approached it as wanting to be partners in making this a better place. He appreciated that, and what we're going to, our suggestion was that there be a meeting with all of the vice presidents at BC, so that together we could sit down to talk about ways to make this a better Boston College. So it's on us now to work on the agenda for that meeting, and I think it's going to happen sometime before the end of the spring. So there is no lack of goodwill here. Folk are willing to work together at making this a better Boston College.
Well, that sounds very